Hi, I'm Tony Holtz from Axiom Compliance Learning, and welcome to our fire door inspection and maintenance course. This video is to help you in your training for inspection and maintenance of fire door systems, and I just thought I would bring up a couple of important points before we start. First of all, there's many different types of fire doors. There is fire shutters, which are roller doors that have got certain requirements. There are window shutters, there are well-wetting sprinklers, there are double doors, there are single doors, there are pivot doors. There are doors with fire-rated glass in them and many different attachments that you can get to the doors. So we're putting together a video which covers a general requirement of inspection and maintenance of fire doors, but understand that the checklist goes on and on and on when you've got different types of fire doors to be inspected. So enjoy the video. Thank you very much. We're going to perform a 6-monthly inspection on a hinged and pivoted fire door. And we're going to use our simulated fire door today and look at all of the aspects for this particular type of door. Now, there are many different types of protections for openings. So a fire door protects an opening in a fire resistive compartment or wall. So you've got to remember there's windows, there's larger doors which require 2 doors, and there is also some attachments on doors that are not on this particular door. So I'll mention those attachments, but we must be aware that the checklist can be varied and quite long. For that reason, I'm going to make sure that I've got a checklist in my hand, and the record keeping for this particular type of inspection is a log required by the standard, as opposed to a lot of other inspections which just require a summary record. And we go through the difference between a log and a summary record during the courses. Okay, so let's begin covering off the items on our checklist. Item number 1, we need to make sure that the door hasn't been modified. So modification in general is the changing of the hardware. So latches and handles and hinges and things that break on doors get changed. It's really important that the door sets and all of the hardware that goes onto doors is the same as what was tested under the original testing for the fire resistive door set as a set. So the hardware is a part of a door set, and we need to establish, as we go through, we'll establish how do we know whether this door handle is in fact a fire door handle. So more about that later. So in general, this door hasn't been changed or modified. It appears to have all of the right and the same features on as it had originally. And some telltale indicators is generally the door is painted. And so if you see evidence that there is a difference around where the door set probably used to go, and then there's a new set in its place, maybe you've got to investigate whether that door set is compliant or not. So for this particular door set, we've had it made with a clear laminated face. This gives us an idea of how a fire door is constructed and how it's different to a general door. So we can see this material in the middle is a fire resistive material. It makes the door quite heavy. And one of the key indicators of fire doors is they'll always have 3 hinges down the side because of the weight of the door forcing the door to move in the off-hinge direction. So you'll also notice that there are metal plates around where any hardware has been attached to the door. That's because although this is a fairly dense material, it doesn't have any integral strength. So when you screw screws in to hold the hinges in place, we need some kind of structural integrity to make sure the door stays upright. And so oftentimes, if you're looking at a door that's laminated, you won't obviously see these plates that are in the door. And so we can use a magnet, and we put a magnet around the door on those places to see whether the door is actually a fire door or not, because it just looks like a normal door in most circumstances. So we need to establish that the door hasn't been modified since the last inspection, and you may want to compare this door to other doors that are in the installation. And as I said before, it's generally the hardware that's going to indicate whether the door's been modified. It's very difficult to modify a structural door set other than putting new handles or new lock sets on. So I think this is okay. It hasn't been modified since the last inspection. The other way to prove that it's a fire door, and our second item on our checklist, is make sure it's labelled and tagged as a fire door. So another key indicator of a fire door is these labels. And this particular door label says fire door, do not obstruct and do not keep open. Now I've labelled this door as though it was an egress door to an open space. So there are a number of reasons that you would use a fire door. For example, if you had a block of units and each of those units were fire separated, or even in a motel situation where each room was fire separated from another room, then the fire door would be a part of the egress system, but it would only be out into a corridor. It wouldn't be the point of egress into an open space to egress the building. So you can also use fire doors for cupboards and other places around the building that are required to be fire resistive. And so the signage is different for those areas. So I'm just going to explain briefly what the signage should look like if you have a door egressing out into an open space where it's the last door somebody goes out of to get out of a building. So in that case, you must have this sign on both sides of the door. So that kind of indicates that we shouldn't be blocking the door, and the door shouldn't be kept jammed open at any point in time. So the fire door sign must be on both sides of the door when you're egressing into an open space. There's another signage which is called statutory signage, and it's an offence to block a fire door or to stop the path of egress out of a building. And we have to clearly label and tell people that it is an offence to do that. And for this type of door where we're egressing into an open space, once again, this statutory signage is required on both sides of the door. So on the inside of a building, this signage is only required if you're egressing into an isolated fire stairwell. So an actual fire escape system, every door within the building that opens into that fire escape system must have this signage on the egress point. So not on the off side of the building, but on the entry side of the fire stairs. Okay, so the signage this side looks okay. We'll look at the other side of the door in a second, but all that signage looks okay from this point. Okay, so that's our markings, tags and labels. I need to look and see that we have tags indicating that it's a fire door. Now, I'm going to open the door and we'll see these tags on the hinged side of the door. And here I can see that I have a door tag and a frame tag. Now, at this point I don't want to go through all of the required information on those tags, but in your course notes, you've got pictures of those tags and it tells you the information that's required on those tags. And most important is that the door has a tag number on it so that we can identify that tag number with a particular inspection. So the door ID number, if you will, is on that tag on the door. The frame tag doesn't require an ID, okay? So the frame is inspected along with the door. The frame and the door is considered a door set, okay? So this part of the label here indicates a fire resistive level, the FRL. And there are three parts to a fire resistive level, and the first part is structural integrity. So the ability for the member to hold up a structure under fire conditions. Now, a door doesn't hold up a structure, so that's why that's blank. The second one is the integrity, so its ability to maintain its structural, the door itself's ability to maintain and resist fire, which means for 60 minutes, the door is capable of resisting fire and stopping fire from penetrating the door and going into the next area. And then the third rating is 30, and that is an insulation rating and the door's ability to maintain a reasonable temperature on the non-fire side of the door for 30 minutes. The next step is checking the door clearances. We need to check that the gaps around the door are less than no more than 3 millimeters from the door frame to the edge of the door. On the bottom of the door, we've got to ensure that we have at least 3 millimeters, but no more than 10 millimeters. And there's an additional requirement to make sure that from the hard surface or the non-combustible surface, you have no more than 25 millimeters. From the non-combustible surfaces, which may be concrete underneath carpet, for example, 25 millimeters from there to the bottom of the door. So there are a number of slides and checks that you can use. I'm pretty miserable, so I just use coins. So a $1 coin is around about 3 millimeters. In fact, it's exactly 3 millimeters thick. So remember, this is only a half-size door. So if you had a full door at 2.1 meters, you would need to check in 3 places, 750 millimeters apart. So up here, I don't know whether you can see it, but it's very tight. In the middle of the door, it's still quite tight. I can't get my coin in there. And at the bottom of the door, I can just start to get my coin in there. So this side of the door is okay. At the top of the door, I've got to do it twice. So, I can get my coin in there and it wiggles. So I've got about 3.5 millimeters there, and as I slide along, my gap gets less. And it's getting very tight up this end. Down this side, it's very tight. On the top edge of this door here, it's quite loose. It's getting to around about 4 millimeters. And as I come down the door, I'll see that it gets tighter again. And what you'll notice is that it's tight up here and loose over here, which means the door is starting to fall this way. And you'll see that it'll be looser down there and tighter down here. Okay, which is very typical of fire doors. The hinges start to move forward and it changes the state of the door. Okay, so I'm not going to fail those gaps. I'm going to make a note that the gaps are a little bit wide. And the reason I'm not going to fail them is because we have a seal around the door. So by using proprietary seals, we can compensate for those gaps around the door. Okay. So on the bottom of the door, my pocket knife is almost exactly 10 millimeters. So if I can fit that pocket knife underneath the door, okay, so that is less than 10 millimeters, it's perfect. And I also want to show you on the bottom of the door, I've got another seal as well, so it's called a drop seal. And a drop seal is another mechanism that you can use if your gaps get a little bit big. Very expensive to replace these doors, and we've got different ways that we can compensate for small changes to the door, and I'll just mention those as we go along. So my gaps, they look okay. They're certainly not worth spending $3,500, $4,000 to replace the door, so I'm going to give them a pass, but I'm always going to make a note if it is above or below the measurements that are required. Okay, so I'll grab my trusty checklist, see what we've got next. Hardware. So we've got to check and make sure that the hardware used on the door is the type that was on the door when the testing took place. So as somebody who sponsors a test on a door, a manufacturer has to send this away to be burnt. And all of the hardware and the different types of hardware must be tested with the door, and that becomes a door set. So when you're doing these doors, this is the hardest part. We really should have a door register in the building. Very rarely do you get the door register as a part of the baseline data for a building. So at this point, we need to start to establish this baseline data. So I'm going to look and see whether this hardware is, number one, fire rated, and number two, designed into the door test. So sometimes I've got to go back to the manufacturer of the door. I've got to look at the serial numbers of the hardware and check with the manufacturer of the door set, which is named on the label, whether that hardware is suitable for this door. And once I've established that, I can start a register of doors and I can create my baseline data. This has only got to be done once, and it's worth doing. You cannot inspect the door correctly unless you've checked that the hardware is the right type. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and First of all, the handle on the fire door has got to be a lever. So a lever has a straight edge as opposed to a knob. It can only be a knob if it's a residence. In general, and it's not an absolute requirement, just a lever action is all that's required, but the D-shaped handle is generally the handle that the manufacturer will make when it's fire rated so that your hand doesn't slip off it. So the standard says you've got to have a lever that the hand doesn't slip off, and that's what the manufacturers do to stop that. They use a D-shaped handle. So it can't be a knob. So, you know the round knobs you get? Can't be a knob. It can be a knob, okay, if it's on a residential type door. So if you've got a block of units, you can pick your own door setting and use knobs only on a door into a living quarters, okay? All other doors for egress must be what I call a D-shaped handle. So not only is it a lever, but it's a D-shaped handle. And that way, if you're crawling towards an exit point and it's hot and it's smoky and you're just about out of breath, when you put your hand on that door and it doesn't slip off, okay? And you can open the door without too much effort. It needs to be a lever and it needs to be a certain shape. That's a good indicator that that is probably a fire door handle. Now, to determine if it's a fire door handle, I'm going to need to open the door because very difficult to find the manufacturer's marking on the actual handle itself. So I'm going to open up the door and I'm just going to check. Oftentimes you can see the information here. And I can see that I've got a marking F, which means it's fire rated. This F indicates it's a fire rated door set, lock set. The manufacturer is UL, and there's a model number that we can reference back with the manufacturer and to the door manufacturer as well. So the lock set manufacturer will confirm it's a fire rated door lock, and then the manufacturer of the door will confirm that that particular manufactured door set is for this door. Now I'm looking at the lock. Now, a fire door should not be able to be locked. Okay, so the only time a fire door can be locked is if it's a part of a living quarters or living unit, which makes sense. You've got to be able to provide security for yourself and your family. So there are conditions though. If I'm going to put a lock on a fire door, it can't be a deadlock. Okay, because a deadlock will prevent the door from closing. And it's no longer a fire door anymore. And the other thing about this is when you look at the hardware itself, there's no labelling on it to indicate that it's an F, there's no F on it. So if you went to Lane and you said, I want to look at your lock sets, they would not tell you that that's not a fire rated lock set, guaranteed. So if I'm going to use a deadlock, if I'm going to use a lock on a door, it must be able to be operated without a key. So imagine if you're inside your unit and it's burning and you can't find the key to the door, you'll never get out. It must be, once again, a hand-operated lock. And the lock set must have a beveled edge on it so that it also has a door striker which will aid the closing of the door automatically. So there are conditions on this lock set. So this door fails because somebody has changed this lock or put this lock on, and it's definitely a non-compliant lock, okay? The other hardware that I've got on my hinges, hinges are difficult because you don't really have a lot of marking on hinges. You've just got to look at the stainless steel hinge, make sure that it hasn't been changed, and to the best of your ability, determine whether that hinge is actually meant to be on that door. And then the third thing is your door closer. So once again, with a door closer, you can slide off the face and you can gain the manufacturer's information and the model numbers and everything on the door closer, and you can investigate that and find out if it is actually fire rated and designed for this particular door set. All right, so there's a lot to consider, isn't there? So now that we've got the door open, we can see the other side of the door, and we can see the other side of the door is just laminated with masonite, so we can't see the inside of the door. But we can see our signage, and we can see that we have the appropriate signage on this side of the door as well. and our lock set looks fairly tight and good. And it doesn't look like we've had any damage to the door as well. So while we've got our door open and we're checking it out, just check it out and make sure, and this is a part of the checklist, make sure that you don't have any damage to the door, okay? The other thing is that imagine if this was a door and you started to get that movement that I was showing you before, and you're thinking, this door seems like it's falling forward. Now that can be because it's installed incorrectly. So remember, you don't have the benefit of seeing where those bracing pieces are for the hinges in the door set when you're looking at the door that looks like this. What if the person who installed it upside down? And so you have your hinge plates on this side and your door handles plates on this side, and so your hinges are actually not going into anything substantial and holding the door in place. So a good indicator on all door sets, on top of the door on the hinge side, there is a little hole drilled, or there is an indicator of some kind that is the top of the door and it is the hinged side of the door. So sometimes I've got to use my camera of my phone to have a look at that and see. The older door sets have got a little groove in the top of it, so you can run your finger along the top of it and see whether that's the top of the door. So that's another little indicator that you can use to see whether the door's been installed correctly. Okay, so while I'm here and while we've got the door open, we should be looking at the striker plate. The door striker forms a really important part of the door closing action, so it must be recessed into the door frame, and it's got to have this beveled edge on it to aid the closing of the door. So if you don't have a door striker plate, it's an immediate fail on the door and you've got to replace that striker plate. It must be the same striker plate as the door lock set as well. We can also start to look at the frame. Now a fire door set frame is different to even a normal metal door frame. First of all, this is called a door stop. The door stop on a fire door frame is at least 25 millimetres thick. Now, some of the smaller 37 millimetre doors, like the mini doors they call them, that can go down to 15 millimetres. But in general, that should be around about 25 millimetres, which is a good indicator that it's a fire door set, because I've seen fire doors that is not a fire door frame. It's been tagged as a fire door frame by somebody, and it's not a fire door frame. Because if I inspect the frame, you think about it, if you've got a fire trying to push through this into an exit that people are trying to escape from, you don't want smoke or fire coming around these edges here, because you've got a wall here. And also, you don't want fire coming or smoke coming in and around these closing points, all right? And so one of the other inspection points on the list is this seal. So you don't have to have a seal on a fire door. A fire door is not a smoke door. A smoke door is only a smoke door, because that's a part of this subject, fire and smoke doors, but all the same inspections apply, except the smoke door has got a tag telling you it's a smoke door. And when you look in your course notes, you'll see that the smoke door has a separate and different tag to a fire door. So if I have seals, I'm going to inspect the seals. Now when you inspect the seals, just try and push them up and down a little bit, because they do move inside their sleeve, and just make sure that they're all in good condition. And once again, is that seal rated for fire? This particular door has a 2-hour fire rating, and when we have a close-up look at that label, I'll show you the rating plate, and it tells you on the rating plate how many minutes that the door is meant to last under fire conditions. So we have to make sure that any of these additional hardware items are fire rated. And once again, that'll go into our register, and we'll be able to have that as our baseline data and not have to worry about it anymore, because we've already checked it out. And we can also see around the edge of it, and oftentimes these fire door seals are put in place right from the installation time. These seals have got to be inspected to make sure they don't have any gaps or breaks or holes in them. It's also a good idea to slide them up and down and see whether they're moving or not. And once again, it's a piece of hardware. We've got to make sure that this is actually a fire rated seal and it's meant to go on this particular door set. Okay? So when you're inspecting your frame, just look around all of the joins. A key indicator that the door frame is not a fire door frame is when you just get spot welds in the corners. You should have a completely sealed corner and edge on those frames. The other thing about the frame is you've got to make sure that the frame is core and backfilled. Now obviously I can't backfill this frame because it has not connected to anything, but what you do is you knock on the door and you look for you listen for a different sound. And if you can definitely hear a hollow sound in there, that needs to be filled. And once again, we don't have to pull the door frame out and seal it. We can seal it we can drill up to a 25mm hole into the frame of a door and we can fill it with fire rated foam. So you might need to get a specialised person to do that, but there are options. Okay, so that takes care of the frame of the door. We just need to look at a couple of warping factors and stuff like that when the door's closed. But while we've got the door open, I'd just like to point out that some of the doors will have a drop seal on them, so that when the door closes, a small seal drops down and bridges the gap between the bottom of the door and the door's floor surface. So over here, we've got a little button on the back of the door, and when that button gets pushed as the door closes, you may see a seal drop down here, and it's called a drop seal for that reason. So the drop seal activator comes back and hits on the door frame and drops the seal at the bottom of the door. And that closes the space between the bottom of the door and the floor. That drop seal can be retrofitted after the door's been put in place, in the event that somebody changes the surface of the floor from carpet to tiles, for example, the gap may change. Rather than changing the door, we can add a drop seal in and we can screw it to the front of the door. Once again, any hardware that you're putting onto a door, I always take a picture of that hardware label plate, because once it's on, very difficult to track it back to a fire rated product. So make sure that all of the products are in the fire door register as being an additional product added to the door. So we've spoken about the seals, we've spoken about our gaps. We need now to close the door, and there's a check that we need to make on the handle. So remember that the door is opening into or out to an exit of some kind, so either an egress path or to the outside of an open area or an open space. So in actual fact, we're entering the door from this side. Now, one of the other checks that the standard requires us to make is that the distance between this handle and the door stop, that needs to be 35mm minimum between the edge of that door handle and the door stop. So the door stop would be this part of the door here. The reason for that is that when I'm trying to exit a door, if my hand can become a block if it hits the side of the door frame. So I need a space there. So it's important that we check that. Now, when we're checking the self-closing of a door, I just want you to notice that the door stops in a position at about probably 10 degrees away from the door, and then it goes into a second closing mode. And I'll show you how you can adjust those closing modes on the door closer as we go through that door closer inspection. But you'll see it close and then stop and goes into a faster action to actually make sure the door has a little bit more force and closes against that resistance. I'm going to close the door again and look at the frictional, the forces of closing. And I'm going to check it from a couple of angles. So I'm going to call that 90 degrees. I'm going to say, does the door close automatically at 90 degrees? Yes, it does. I'm going to then check it at 45. So will it close automatically at 45? Yes, it does. And each time I do it, you can see that little stopping point, and then it changes into a different closing mechanism. So now I'm going to try it from about 5 degrees. So now I'm into the second stage of the door close. There I can actually feel it as I'm closing the door. Bang, it's moved into that second stage. I move it past into that second stage and it closes. So I'm happy the door is automatically closing. All right. So Now I'm just checking and I'm looking along the door. Now I'm not going to get a benefit in most cases of looking along a door like this. So sometimes you've got to get down and look along the door and make sure you're not seeing any noticeable warping of the door or warping of the door frame. So that will mean that your door will start to stick out past the door frame, or your frame itself will look like it's a little bit odd and an odd angle will appear there. That all looks pretty good. And I've got the benefit of looking down as well. It all looks pretty good. So coming back to our door closer, I've got to make sure that the door closer is not obstructed by anything. Sometimes it can get a little bit close to the door frame there. So I want to make sure it's not rubbing on the door frame as it's closing, and that we don't have any leaks, because this has oil in it. It's a hydraulic door closer. There's no leaks. It's pretty much brand new. So all of these closers, they have a sliding plate on them. And this is where we're going to get our manufacturer's information from so that we can check. And it also gives you some instructions on how you can adjust the closing speed of the door. So you have a latching speed, which was that second part where it actually closes the final closing section, and you have a closing speed. So and you can adjust it positive or negative. And so just use a screwdriver if you feel that the door closing, well, if it's not self-closing, you've got to adjust it until it is. If it doesn't work, change the closer. So I've got a plus or minus there. I can increase the tension on the latching or the closing speed of the door if I need to do that. So the last thing probably is a door stop. So I can open this door to the point where I can pretty much rip it off the hinges. So if you can imagine, that is now starting to put force on the closer and force on the hinges. So sometimes we require a door stop. It's a little bit like your doors at home. If you've got a door handle shaped hole in your gyprock wall, that's because you don't have a door stop. So a door stop on the checklist just simply means something that comes back and stops the door from coming past that point of no return. And it's going to start to damage the door if it continually is open to that position. So we don't have a door stop here, but I am aware that I need to be stopping that door before it comes back to that position. And the only other thing with doors is you can get doors that are actually a double door set. So I'll just make this point. Let's say, for example, and we would have all seen them, we've got a corridor in a hospital or a nursing home. The nursing home has separated areas within it, and in the event of a fire in this area, the doors are automatically closed by a magnetic door holder. So the fire indicating panel will de-energise the magnet and the doors will automatically close. Now that means the doors are closing in a position like this and coming together. So where the doors meet, there is a meeting point called an astragal. Now look it up. We go through it in the course. An astragal is where those doors meet. So remember, we've got a sealing point where those doors need to seal at that point. And there is oftentimes a very thick brush seal or some kind of a seal that might meet where those doors come together. And the other thing with double doors is sometimes you'll need a sequencer. So if you have an astragal and the astragal is coming past and hitting against the other door to make that seal, then this door has to close first. So what's stopping this door from coming closed first is what we call a door sequencer. So the door sequencer holds that door open, this door comes in, hits the door sequencer, and then allows that the door close secondly. Once again, look it up and Dr. Google and find out all the information you need about double door sets. If you have a viewing panel in a door, that must be fire-rated glass. And once again, you've got to go back and do some investigation to make sure that you have fire-rated glass in that viewing panel. If you have a grill on the bottom of the door, so if the door is a part of an air-conditioned system or a pressurised room system, somehow you need to allow air to go in and out of that door. There are fire-rated door grills. Once again, investigate it and make sure the door grill is a fire-rated door grill. So it's just another part of the hardware. As an inspection person of a door, you have the obligation and responsibility to ensure that all hardware on the door meets the standard. Now it may need to meet the manufacturer's standard of the door, but certainly it needs to meet the fire rating standard. So If the door is a 2-hour fire rated door, all the hardware must be 2-hour fire rated. So you can get a 1-hour fire rated door or a 2-hour fire rated door, and that's indicated on the label. And in your course notes, it clearly tells you what those numbers mean on that label for fire rating. So thanks for watching. See you in the next video.